The year is 1297. Picture a medieval battlefield, shields clashing, banners fluttering, and the cries of soldiers echoing across the fields. Behind this spectacle of power, behind the steel and the blood, lies something far more humble: a sheep. Its fleece, soft and white, seems ordinary, but in medieval England, that fleece was power itself. It was wealth, it was survival, and it was the foundation upon which kings built kingdoms. This is the story of wool, the quiet force that held the fate of medieval England in its threads. Imagine the rolling green hills of the English countryside. Sheep graze peacefully, their woolly coats thick with fleece. To us, this may look like a simple pastoral scene. But in the Middle Ages, these sheep were not just animals, they were treasure on four legs. Every strand of wool carried the promise of fortune, of trade, of power. And the English crown knew it well. By the late 13th century, wool was so valuable that the monarchy relied on it to fund wars, build castles, and maintain authority. Taxation on wool exports became one of the crown's greatest sources of revenue. It's no exaggeration to say that wool was the lifeblood of medieval England, flowing from its fields into the very veins of the kingdom. But why wool? Why not gold, or silver, or other precious metals mined from the earth? The answer lies in Europe's insatiable hunger for cloth. Across the continent, in the workshops of Flanders, in the bustling cities of Italy, in the marketplaces of Spain, merchants and weavers clamored for English wool. It was softer, finer, and stronger than most wool produced elsewhere. Flemish looms in cities like Ghent and Bruges transformed English fleece into luxurious cloth, worn by nobles and kings. And as that demand soared, so too did England's fortunes. The demand was so great that it reshaped the very landscape of England. Whole villages were abandoned, their fields enclosed for sheep pastures. The practice of enclosure, where lords and landlords fenced off land that peasants once farmed, transformed the countryside forever. Sheep became more profitable than people, and thousands of ordinary men and women were forced from their homes. For the peasants, wool could mean ruin. For the lords, it meant riches and power beyond imagination. And the church was no exception. Monasteries became wool empires. Monks in vast abbeys like Fountains and Rievaulx managed enormous flocks, producing wool of unmatched quality. These religious houses were not just sanctuaries of prayer, they were economic powerhouses. Their wool traveled across Europe, their profits building cathedrals, expanding monasteries, and funding the splendor of the church. So great was wool's power that it became stitched into the very fabric of government. To this day, the seat of the Lord Speaker in the House of Lords rests on the wool sack, a large cushion stuffed with English wool. It was no accident. It was a deliberate symbol, a reminder that England's political power was literally seated upon wool. But with wealth came rivalry. Across the Channel, other kingdoms eyed England's wool monopoly with envy. Flanders depended heavily on English fleece for its thriving cloth industry. France and other rivals sought ways to break that dependence. Trade agreements were struck, alliances tested, wars ignited, all with wool at their core. When Edward d'Ithry laid claim to the French throne in the 14th century, sparking the 100 Years' War, it was wool that helped fund his campaign. Taxes on wool exports filled royal coffers, financing armies, ships, and weapons. Wool became not just commerce, it was strategy, diplomacy, and at times, the very cause of conflict. Picture a knight riding into battle, armor gleaming in the sun. His sword, his shield, his horse. All of it may have been financed by the export of wool to Bruges. Castles like Windsor, Dover, and Warwick rose taller in part because of wool revenues. The destiny of England was wrapped in fleece. The wool trade shaped not only politics but also the culture of medieval England. Merchant guilds, such as the Company of the Staple, rose to prominence by controlling the trade. These merchants became immensely powerful, sometimes rivaling nobles themselves. They lived in grand houses, funded schools and churches, and left their mark on English towns. Wool transformed them from ordinary traders into the architects of prosperity. But while merchants and lords prospered, the humble shepherd lived a harder life. These men and women toiled in the fields, braving harsh winters and long, lonely nights to guard the flocks. Their wages were meager, their lives simple. Yet without their work, the great engine of the wool trade would never have turned. The shepherd's crook was as vital to the kingdom as the king's crown. Across Europe, the reputation of English wool grew so legendary that Italian bankers and merchants treated it as if it were currency itself. Flemish cloth woven from English fleece was a luxury item, prized by kings, queens, and aristocrats. To wear cloth made from English wool was not just to wear clothing, it was to wear status. Yet beneath this prosperity lay inequality. The wool trade widened the gap between rich and poor. Nobles and merchants grew richer, while peasants bore heavy taxes and suffered from displacement. Historians argue that this imbalance sowed the seeds of unrest. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381, though sparked by taxation, echoed with the frustration of a society where wool and wealth seemed more important than human lives. Still, for centuries, wool remained the backbone of England's might. Even as the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, the wool trade filled treasuries, built cathedrals, and financed exploration. Wool was not just a commodity. It was an identity, woven into the very soul of England. Picture a medieval port, ships rocking on the tide as they are loaded with bales of wool, bound for Bruges, Florence, or beyond. Merchants call out orders, scribes record shipments, soldiers guard the precious cargo. Each sack of wool was more than fleece, it was a kingdom's future. As those ships sailed across the Channel, so too did England's influence. It is no coincidence that in medieval England, wool was called the jewel in the realm's crown. It brought stability, wealth, and power, though at a cost. Without wool, England might have remained a small, quiet land of farmers and fields. With wool, it became a force to be reckoned with, shaping its destiny for generations. So, when we ask why wool was worth a kingdom in medieval England, the answer is clear. It was present in every corner of society, in abbeys that grew rich from their flocks, in parliaments seated upon the wool sack, in castles that rose from wool revenues, and in the armies that marched under banners funded by fleece. A simple sheep grazing in a field became the silent architect of empire. Its fleece spun the fortunes of merchants, the prayers of monks, and the ambitions of kings. And though centuries have passed, the legacy remains. Wool was not just cloth, it was power, it was wealth, it was destiny, woven into the very fabric of a nation. So next time you see a ball of wool, hold it in your hand and remembers in medieval England, that humble thread was worth more than crowns, more than swords, more than kingdoms. It was the thread that tied a nation together.